Welcome everyone to the 25th Annual ARC Industry Forum and our session on managing and building a workforce capable of succeeding and thriving in an increasingly digital world. My name is Mike Guilfoyle, and I'll be the host and moderator of this session. We've got an outstanding lineup, and I'm really excited to tackle what I consider to be the most important aspect of industrial innovation, the human side of things. Before we get started, I have a few tips here for optimizing your viewer experience of this session. Shut down all your extra apps if you can. Computer audio tends to transmit much more clearly. If you'd like to submit a question to either of the speaker or the panelists, please use the Q&A function in the control panel at the bottom of the screen. We'll separate out our Q&A for each speaker, spending some time after his or her presentation, followed by a separate panel with more of a traditional open Q&A. And though we are virtual this year, there are still plenty of options for doing what makes the forum special, which is networking with and learning from peers. To do so, you can interact with attendees a number of different ways as listed here. Additionally, you can see some of the topic-specific chats you can join. So let's start this session by taking a look at a traditional view of a worker and work that has remained unchanged in industrial settings for really decades upon decades. Workers were hired with varying levels of KSAs, knowledge, skills, and abilities, that could be applied to the role and responsibilities. These workers were supported with work tools and later computer-based systems. And the expectation was that through experience, the worker improved his or her KSAs, which could also be supplemented through the adoption of better tools or software systems. And for years, for industrial companies, this model rarely ever changed, nor did it really need to. And sure, it was tweaked and modernized, I think, as businesses evolved, but it was still done within a traditional framework around what it meant to be a worker. Digital work environments are simply blowing that model up. As we shift to a digital future and present in a lot of cases, work will become increasingly data-enabled, ecosystem supported, with workers and work processes augmented in real time by both localized and distributed software. In fact, we need to really reconsider what a worker actually looks like. As work becomes increasingly digital, what seems simple on the surface will actually be incredibly complex underneath. In fact, many of the things will be so complex underneath the surface that it'll be really ineffective to try to train or educate a human on the topic so that they can keep up. They simply won't be able to with all the complexity, which will often change in real time. In these instances, decision tools and other software will manage that complexity. The upside to this is that those tools will enable a human to do craft skill work that normally would require many more years of experience. In a digital world, due to the emergence of various forms of artificial intelligence, software can actually be considered as part of the workforce, either enhancing the human or replacing them for work where there is high risk, it's repetitive, or it has well understood outcomes. The software as a worker is also particularly suited for instances, as I mentioned, where underlying processes or data are incredibly complex, but speed and accuracy are paramount. Are we fully immersed in this blended workforce yet? No, but we're getting closer every single day. And with those thoughts to get us going, I'm excited about the upcoming presentations and panel today. We're really going to cover the spectrum when it comes to workforce issues. Chandra Brown, CEO of MXD, and Billy Bardin, Dow's Global Operations Digitalization Director, will start things off, taking a look at the intersection of digital and the workforce. Billy will also share how Dow's work changed last year and what he believes are the implications of those changes. Plant manager Jim Leach will then provide a plant-level view of how COVID-19 accelerated John Deere's digital transformation with an emphasis on human-centered change. And then we have a great panel that brings together academia, industrial association, and manufacturing perspectives. The panel will discuss the fundamental question of how do you even know what to train to in a digital world, as well as tackling education development and how an ecosystem approach is needed to train, upskill, and reskill workers for a digital world. Without further ado, take it away, Chandra and Billy.
Thank you so much, Mike, for that kind introduction, and hello to everyone in our virtual audience today. I know that you all are busier than ever, and I really appreciate everyone taking some time out of their schedules to talk about some of the most critical topics we are facing today. As Mike said, Dr. Billy Bardin and I are going to share some insights about manufacturing workforce trends that we've seen coming. And we're also going to talk about some specific examples of how manufacturers had to think about their workforce strategies when COVID-19 hit. So before we dive in, I thought we'd at least start with a little bit of context for those of you who don't know who MXD is and why am I here today talking about workforce development. So MXD, we are one of 16 manufacturing innovation institutes all across the country, 9 of which are funded by the U.S. Department of Defense, which is we are that as well. And we are the second oldest institute, and we're launched in February 2014. So over the last 5 years, we have established a network of hundreds of projects. We've launched over 60 collaborative projects and built a one-of-a-kind innovation center with a 22,000 square foot factory test bed in Chicago. Come and visit when you can, safely. We also are the National Center for Cybersecurity in Manufacturing. So on our anniversary in 2019, our 5-year anniversary, we announced a new 5-year contract with the U.S. Department of Defense. And so that partnership really has allowed us to double down on some initiatives that we've worked hard to establish, including workforce development, because we know we need to meet the needs and goals of the US government, our national consortium, and really the needs of the United States and the global economy. So, manufacturing industry, it's undergoing a digital transformation. It's important to remember, though, that digital tools are fantastic. I know we're going to do a lot of talk about that, but they are meaningless without the capable workforce to operate them. So given our role working with industry, academic, and government partners, as I said, we're a nonprofit public-private partnership. I'm also often asked, what do you see coming as it relates to the skills revolution, and how well has the industry prepared for this? So I hope this is not a surprise to everyone that's listening, but the harsh truth is this: industry is not prepared. Large industry is not prepared. Small industry is not prepared. Academia is not prepared. More than half of all manufacturers identify building a skilled workforce as their greatest challenge. You'll see on this side here some of the statistics. We know that there will be 4.6 million manufacturing jobs in the US by 2028. 2.4 million of those jobs, that's 53 out of every 100 jobs, will go unfilled due to a skills shortage. At MXD, we know how quickly the manufacturing landscape is evolving. It's part of the work we do. So given this, the manufacturers who will be the most successful going forward are those who expect change and who support and encourage adaptability and continuous learning, both for their workforce and themselves. So in short, one of the most prevalent trends we've seen across the entire industry is that manufacturers need new roles, employees need new skills, and academia needs new curriculum if we're truly going to be prepared for the future of manufacturing. So let's talk about another big trend, right? What is happening right now with COVID-19? We all know this is having a huge impact, not just on our bottom line, but across systemically all over the United States and the world. So what has COVID-19 really done? Well, it's accelerated, it's emphasized and created new workforce challenges for manufacturers. So early in this pandemic, many MXD members approached us for support and how they can fight and how they can compete in this new world order, if you will. So we have a workforce arm, MXD Learn, and basically we double on our initial investments so we could have an immediate impact on this current employment crisis, specifically as it relates to a hybrid learning approach, talking about the areas, for example, of cybersecurity in manufacturing. So while the pandemic, we all know this, has put many traditional jobs on hold, it's actually also created new jobs. So you look at cybersecurity and the increased importance of securing US manufacturing and supply chains. So cybersecurity as an applied STEM career path, that's one way and an example of how you can offer students or transitioning workers a bright outlook in career demand and growth. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the cybersecurity unemployment rate was projected to remain at 0% through 2021. And with this broadening digital landscape, the demand is going to climb even higher. And I'd also want to talk a little bit about the stark truth of some of the minority roles who have been impacted. So let's talk a little bit about women in the workforce and how they've been impacted by COVID-19. According to some new jobs data that were released, 55% of the net 9.8 million jobs lost since February were jobs held by women. And that number doesn't even include the millions of women who have left the labor force due to pandemic-related childcare issues. When broken down even further, Latina and Black women experienced unemployment levels that were higher than the women's overall unemployment rate of 6.3%. And let's talk about this. This pain extends all the way up to the C-suite level, right? And a recent executive level survey reported that the pandemic showed that nearly 30% of C-suite women or vice president level reported that the pandemic had actually altered the course of their career. About 25% of these women said they would leave their posts sooner than expected due to their employer's response to the pandemic. That's some scary statistics here. And manufacturers, and frankly, all US employers, they have to be more creative and diligent in finding ways to attract women and minorities to the workforce. At MXD, we believe that more flexible training options, including these virtual and hybrid learning methods, will actually be a key factor to attracting and retaining this important sector. So that's just a little bit about, some of the trends that we see happening. I want to hand it over now, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Billy Bardin, the Global Operations Digitalization Director at Dow, and also my very good friend. He is going to discuss a little bit about how Dow has prepared for and responded to some of these really critical industry workforce challenges. So take it away, Billy.
Yeah, hi, Chandra, and thanks to the ARC team and for you for inviting me to be here today to talk a little bit about Dow's response to COVID-19 and how things have been going over the past year. I also like to say good morning and good evening and good afternoon to the audience, no matter when and where you might be watching this video. There's no doubt that what happened in 2020 affected many ways how companies do business. If you look at Dow specifically, it impacted our employees, it impacted our customers, it impacted our clients, our communities, all of our stakeholders. And so Dow, we developed a corporate-wide, global-wide response. And we're a global company. We have operating sites around the globe. We have sales offices around the globe. We were able to see this coming from Asia, rolling through Europe and into North America and Latin America and South America as the year progressed. And so based on our experiences in Asia Pacific early in the first quarter, we were able to tailor some responses for Europe and the Americas that helped us manage the overall impacts. And one of the first things we started to do was stand up our global response teams. And very quickly, we learned that we had to have an overall unified plan of how we're going to approach that with lots of local input, because every region was different, every locality, every local government had different restrictions and different approaches. we were fortunate in Dow that we did have already considered all the way back in 2019 a response to global pandemic. So we had a very unified, very structured global pandemic response plan in place. But I can tell you, as this progressed and we saw COVID move from region to region, we learned a lot, and we had to be adaptable and agile and change. And the basic function of our global pandemic plan was true and guided us from our principles and our perspectives. But we bolted on a lot, and as we gained more knowledge, we implemented new procedures and processes. One of the very first things we did was develop what we call our return to workplace playbook, which you see here on the left side of the screen. We use this internally initially to set our principles, how we would work with our employees and our customers and clients. But then we saw a need in the industry, and then Chandra mentioned the manufacturing institutes and how they work with the community. I think one of the things I'm most proud of about the Dow team is our impact on the community. So we made our internal playbook available to the industry. It's been downloaded, I think, more than 2,000 times by this point. Shared that with our colleagues in academia, with our stakeholders in government, able to leverage out the approaches we were taking, setting very clear criteria of when we would bring people back to the workplace or not, how we would have those people interact in terms of social distancing and safe practices within the workplace, what we would do in terms of cleaning and sanitizing, setting new corporate expectations and new guidelines around how we work and work safely. And we're a large manufacturer. We had to keep our facilities running, and we've throughout the pandemic in all of our regions had our facilities running. We continue to do our maintenance and work practices. We continue to do turnarounds, albeit in a new way. One would have never imagined in January of 2020 that we would be working. And I think our response also enabled us to meet our economic targets as best as possible in a very severe economic downturn, and it enabled Dow to help the community. Some of the things we looked at very quickly in the first quarter even of last year, we started to ramp up production of hand sanitizer, which was, if you recall, in very high demand by hospitals and local health associations. There wasn't enough to go around, so we started tailoring our asset base to make hand sanitizer, ultimately making somewhere near 200 metric tons for distribution to local community health resources. We started to look at our product portfolio. Where were we having impact? So things like our packaging business, where lots of people were eating at home and the need for individual food packaging went up. So we started to tailor and make sure we had production in those product areas. Taking our polyethylene film and making PPE, as we had PPE shortages in the early days of the pandemic. And so PPE, polyethylene suits, PPE masks, those sorts of things we were involved with. And then ultimately in our silicones business, we have a lot of products that go into healthcare, whether it's for ventilators and silicones for tubing for IVs. But all of those demands we met. We made sure we had safe and reliable production to enable the healthcare community to respond to the pandemic as it was progressing. I think the other thing that I really look back on and how we responded was bringing digital skills to the table and looking at what we could do to predict how the pandemic would progress, how we would set criteria that would allow us to safely return people back to work with advanced modeling, looking at optimization of resources, looking at new supply chains and bringing digital skills into the supply chain. As we know, there was a lot of impact around supply chain as regions started up or shut down or had restrictions. And so like everyone else in the manufacturing and the community and the industry broadly, we had to manage our supply chain, make sure that we were addressing needs and making a more resilient, robust program from a supply chain perspective. So there's no doubt there was a lot of impacts. We have had over the last year a significant portion of our personnel working from home. We had our manufacturing personnel working in the facilities. We had our global SMEs that normally would travel for turnarounds and inspections. We found ways to use digital skills and digital tools like field collaboration systems to enable them to participate without having to actually physically be at the plant site or location. And one of the best aspects I like about my role is that I get to help Dow deploy these digital tools across R&D and supply chain manufacturing and sort of be a champion or push the digital transformation within the company. And that goes all the way from our supply chain and raw material components all the way through our manufacturing, through production planning, and ultimately to delivering those materials to the customer. And we've seen, and Dow in fact doubled down on its investment in 2020 when it comes to deploying digital tools and digital capabilities. there's no doubt that the way we do work going forward is not going to be the way that we did work pre-pandemic. And we have to, therefore, uplift and reskill the workforce to use those digital capabilities. Most of our staff had never participated in the number of virtual meetings, virtual conferences, remote collaboration that they have done over the last 12 months. And I think Dow has been very successful at ensuring that we kept the business running. We had those capabilities for the employees to use to collaborate. And some of our our newest and most dynamic teams, things like we have in our Digital Operations Center, which are tasked to look at digital skills, they started collaborating remotely from an open work collaborative environment in person, started collaborating remotely and didn't miss a beat. They've essentially continued their role. Same with our R&D teams, with our finance teams. They're doing things today that they never would have imagined being able to do remotely or collaboratively over net meetings and WebEx and other collaboration tools that they would have thought about in 2019. Total transformation of how Dow works top to bottom. But in the end, the objectives of Dow still remain the same: to be sustainable, to have safe, reliable production that meet our customers' needs. And in fact, we have been able to do that by addressing with agility the challenges that we faced in 2020. Okay, well, maybe at this point we ought to bring Chandra back into the call and have a little bit of a chat about how she has seen from her position and with MXD the changes and the differences amongst the industry players, and what maybe take-home messages or key takeaways you could discuss for success around those that have performed well in the pandemic conditions. Chandra, you back with us?
I am. Thank you for inviting me back, and thank you so much for all those insights and the great work that Dow has been doing. I love having those real-world examples. I think it's really important. So yes, let's talk a little bit. One of the things I love about my job is that, we're at the intersection, right? Public companies, private companies, big companies, small companies, academia, I just love it. And so we see really what's going on across the nation. And I've really, I think that there's been two, let's say, common themes. And we've really seen this change and improve actually during COVID-19. And the first one is that importance of leveraging digital technologies. I know exactly what you were saying, right? We've always known digital technologies are important, but the pandemic has just increased the importance of it. And we just know whether it's productivity for workers, whether it's for efficiency on your plant floors. We know that we must have more data-driven decision-making, and especially when things are changing so rapidly, it just becomes even more critical. We look at our supply chains, right, and what happened during the pandemic, and how we know we need to get them the right answers and the right data quicker. So I think that's one of the good things, is that we know that there's tools out there that we can harness them, and that we need to help, the entire supply chain become more resilient to really help us respond as a nation, to this crisis. I think the second big lesson or takeaway that we've learned is that talking to our members across this whole ecosystem, that it really is the power of collaboration that made a lot of things possible. I loved some of the examples you gave, Billy, and I know you opened up, some of your playbooks, right, and how-tos. We put things online, such as how to make a PPE mask, safe digital instructions. All of us had to come together in the beginning, little mom and pop shops making PPE equipment. We did the same at MXD. We're not really a big production facility like Dow, but we did our part and made masks for the local hospital workers. And I think that's super important. And we all learned that, we must collaborate. And I think this is so great because manufacturers, right, we're doers. That's our very nature inherent. And our natural response in a crisis is to do and to make. And, that's really what we did. And I think these strong partnerships, we always talk about this importance of this public-private partnerships, like MXD, like ARC, like lots of other groups, in your own local areas, is that we're going to come to better solutions quicker. And the only way you get out of these global crises is actually by working together and collaborating.
Yeah, that's true. We saw that in our value chain as well. We worked with customers to look at how we could make PPE available more quickly. We looked at actually based on demand we were seeing from some of our value chain partners. We restarted an isopropanol asset, for example, that had been idled for almost a couple of years, but you could see the immediate demand, and so we worked with our partners to push that product into the market, and the Dow team did a great job of restarting that asset safely and making it produce product. We looked at how we could collaborate remotely with customers, something that we've done in the past on occasion, but never to the extent that we did in the past year, bringing them into our product development facilities, standing up all new virtual customer interaction facilities that we could use to showcase products, to design products, to look at how we would put our materials into their products, help them meet their immediate economic and community and market needs, but also longer range goals like sustainability goals, for example. And so the way we worked was totally dynamic. It had to be in the current conditions. And in fact, I expect we're going to see a lot more of that post-pandemic.
Oh, I totally agree. I think you're going to see a lot more of that. I mean, some of these are good lessons learned, right? That's going to carry us forward, in the future. I have another question for you, Billy, like from your leadership kind of perspective in the industry. How would you recommend manufacturers continue to prioritize engagement with the community on these workforce development initiatives? Like, we all know there's so many things pulling at our time and energy. How would you say that they should do that?
Yeah, workforce development is an investment. It has to be considered that way. You're going to get the return in 3 months, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years as you invest in your workforce, and the people you onboard today or you train or give new skills to today will become leaders in the future. I mean, Dow and MXD have been partners since the beginning back in 2014. And I think some of the taxonomies that MXD has put together around digital skills and cybersecurity have been great guides for the industry in terms of what roles could be contemplated in the new economy and a new way of working. And for us at Dow, for example, during this time, we doubled down on investments in skills and workforces. We looked at increasing our interactions, for example, with HBCUs. Now, you mentioned in your opening remarks about the underrepresented groups in the manufacturing area. We're trying to entice and increase that pool with some of the work that we're doing through our Dow Acts program to bring on underrepresented groups within the manufacturing community. We also started to deploy new digital skill roles like site cybersecurity and IT specialists that they're not classic business IT people that are supporting ERP systems. They're deploying and supporting frontline collaboration systems, mobile worker devices, those sorts of things, as well as enhancing our cybersecurity profile at our manufacturing facilities. And so we see that as a critical need. I think if you look to how we're trying to bring on new skills within our process operators and process technicians, for example, we started to put digital skills into our process tech courses from where we hire our process operators. And we're doing things like digital co-ops, where we bring college graduates or college students, engineers onto Dow site and give them experience in an analytics group, in a process control group. And then when they go back to campus, for example, they take bolt-on courses in data science and analytics. Those two go hand in hand to bring a much more data savvy worker to the organization when they're hired full time. We didn't stop that during the last year. In fact, we increased our interactions there and continue to work diligently to make those investments in workforce. I think you see that as organizations grow, they're going to look for skills. They're going to look for certification of skills, not necessarily four-year college degrees, but look at how you have micro certificates or micro degrees, certifications, online training, things that actually show and one can demonstrate they have those skills to make themselves a candidate for a position. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a bachelor's degree in engineering anymore to get those kind of roles. It's more about what the person can do as much as it is about the piece of paper that's hanging on the wall behind them.
I completely agree with everything you said. It's so funny. I tell this all the time. Like, when I used to be a CEO of a metal manufacturing company, I was always, I needed more welders and fitters and machinists, and we still have that skilled trade shortage in the United States and honestly globally. But now at MXD, I'm even more worried about the looming, right, digital and cyber gap that's coming. I mean, when I think about, you heard me say 2.4 million manufacturing jobs unfilled, like this is absolutely going to take a community effort, and the investments need to happen now. That's why I really appreciate, Dow kind of leading by example on what you did during the pandemic. And I love, we're doing the same thing with apprenticeships, and, what we did last year is, again, really get to this cyber hiring guide, because we're really worried about, the cyber. If we're not securing our data, you can have all the data in the world, but it needs to be secure. So we're really a big believer in that. We're going to have to bring, again, this whole community together. And as a manufacturer myself, I always wanted to know, like, what is my region need? How can I prioritize it? And we really have, when I say community, I mean, all the way, right? We know this, but like from the high schools, you have to start young too, like, so you can start at the high school level, right? And then go all the way through community colleges, regular universities, but don't forget things like juvenile detention centers, regional economic groups, local areas, like you said, apprenticeships, unions. There's so much that, you really need to bring together in your own community and figure out how you can best help, the manufacturers of that region. And I want to echo one other thing you said too, when you talk about the certifications and other things, traditional learning methods, right? We're going to have to get a lot more creative, right? They're too rigid. Flexibility is going to be, I think, in premium, and that we're going to need to really prepare, and this includes academics and industry, are going to have to prepare for continuous learning, right? And probably hybrid. That's the other thing we've seen. We're going to be working on getting out some hybrid training sessions, both in person and virtually. Because I think it's going to be a really new way we need to reach people. And don't forget about upskilling, our existing, right, incredible workforce. And, again, I love that you're doing work with HBCUs and minority communities, because we will not get there without them. That's just a fact. So I hope everyone, found this discussion helpful. As a reminder, Billy and I are always happy to answer any questions. So feel free to reach out. We love supporting the manufacturing community as a whole. And I really want to thank everyone at ARC for organizing this forum. And thanks very much also to my good friend, Dr. Billy Bardin, for joining me. And thanks, everyone. Please stay safe and take care.
Thank you much.
Greetings. My name is Jim Leach. I'm the factory manager at Deere Harvester Works, and I'm honored to be able to present to you today to talk a little bit about Harvester's digitalization journey, as well as how that has impacted really positively our ability to navigate COVID-19 in a very dynamic, fast-paced manufacturing environment. So just a little bit about me. I'm originally from the Midwest. I grew up about an hour away from where I work now, although I've lived multiple different locations, not just in Iowa, but around the world. My wife also works for John Deere, and we have a fairly large dynamic family ranging from 11 months old to 21 years old of children, which keeps us incredibly busy. My education was largely in the Midwest. And really my career has been focused almost extensively on operations, from shop floor supervisory positions through operations manager in Brazil at our combine front-end equipment planters factory, and now as a factory manager at really the largest combine factory in the world. As I mentioned, I lived and worked in Horizontina, Brazil for a little less than a year and a half to help usher in some new product programs, and really benefited from that experience of living in a completely different culture, trying mightily to learn a language, and really just the richness of the relationships and the different experiences. And prior to working for John Deere, I was an infantry officer in the Marine Corps. And really I'm proud, I certainly hope to finish this way, that the two organizations that I'll spend my professional career with were the Marines and John Deere, and really the dignity of our mission here at Harvester Works is to feed the world, which really resonates with all of our employees. And so, speaking about Harvester Works and about John Deere is obviously a very well-established company in the United States and really around the world, Deere's 184 years old, and Harvester, the factory that I work at, has been really in existence since 1912. And we really focus on our core manufacturing processes here of metal fab, welding, painting, and assembly. And we do really pride ourselves in bringing in new technologies and really trying to get on the cutting edge from a large ag and turf factory. We manufacture combines for North America and front-end equipment really for around the world, but bringing in some new products this year. And we have a full host of front-end equipment solutions that mate with our combines to make our farmers the most productive in the world. We also have about 1,500 employees, 25,000 active part numbers, and you can see some of the stats here, but it is a large and complex manufacturing operation. And we're really focused on our customers and delivering distinctive product quality in our employees to make sure that they've got a safe environment to operate in, as well as in ensuring that we are really a premier employer in the area that we are. We are located in East Moline, Illinois. Corporate headquarters is just about 5 or 6 miles away. And Deere clearly is one of the leaders and preeminent in ag and precision ag technology. So when we talk about COVID-19, I won't begin to pretend that I'm going to be able to lecture to such a group on how best to navigate these disruptions, but clearly it was an unprecedented time when you think back to March. Luckily for us, we had been on a digital transformation journey for probably about 2 years. In fact, in the fall of 19, we established a full-time data science team for the factory that had data scientists, data catalysts, and data wranglers. And really, we were focused on how do we get knowledge and predictive knowledge out of our embedded intelligence that was already in the factory, and then how can we continue to drive the connectedness so that we could gain more process control and really push towards how we could figure out new ways, new insights to link disparate systems to gain really business insights. And really, we were trying to disrupt ourselves. We were going through a transformation prior to COVID of needing to lean up our organization, both on the shop floor and in the office. And really, digitalization was the way through smart connected factory technology that we had planned to do that. When COVID hit, we needed to pause, and we really needed to just focus on people. The most important thing we were doing in March and April and May was keeping the factory open. And we needed to do that in such a way that was transparent, that we could assuage our employees' fears in the face of so many unknowns. We could provide PPE, and we are also really flexible with our represented union employees in ways we wouldn't have been before. We really were focused on ensuring they could feel safe. Employees that had pre-existing medical conditions, we allowed them to opt out of work, and we paid them at a reduced rate so that they could continue to provide for their families. We were very conservative in case management early on with very aggressive quarantine rules, pushing people out of the factory, even though it impacted technology, but ensuring that they could still provide for their families by continuing to pay them at a reduced rate. And then, early on, we needed to really build a better partnership with our UAW partners inside of the factory because we were designated as critical infrastructure workers because we're vital to food security. And so making sure that the mission of keeping the factory open, even if it was at a reduced rate, and doing it in such a way that our employees could feel safe and not get COVID-19 transmitted here at work was mission one. And really that took a lot of time on the shop floor, extensive meetings with the UAW, meeting with our safety and medical professionals, with shop floor employees to talk through our cleaning protocols, the PPE. We implemented thermal screening, and really tried to do everything possible in order to gain the employees' trust and keep the factory open. Part and parcel of all that at the very beginning, obviously, just like the rest of the world, was where possible, we pushed people out of the factory if they could work remotely. But clearly, as a heavy manufacturer, if you consider right around 300 to 350 of our employees are what we would call salaried or administrative employees, About 2/3 of them could work from home, but the other 100 had to be at the factory because they were critical from an order fulfillment process to deliver work instruction to the employees, to supervise them, to ensure that we had material continue to flow to the factory. And so really we needed to make sure that we worked remotely where possible, but then we adopted that same focus on people, then process, with the rapid adoption of these work protocols. And where possible, we kept people in the factory. And again, social distancing, PPE, all those things we've learned so much about that we didn't know anything about a year ago was really critical to keeping the factory open. Getting to where we are from a technology digitalization, this certainly hastened our adoption of these processes. I'm sure, like most manufacturers, we were seeing typical absenteeism, both planned and unplanned, in our factories around 10%. We were seeing 35 to 40%. And so we needed to get in front of these disruptions in order to make sure, going back to one of the promises we have to our customers is distinctive product quality, we needed to figure out new ways to detect these upset conditions caused by absenteeism. And we needed to enable those employees that were going to go cover a job that maybe they hadn't been trained on. We needed to enable them to be successful and also safe. So one of the first things we did was we reduced our rate of production. We would be dynamic in our expectation for how many combines or how many pieces of front-end equipment we were going to make that day based on who was in the factory. We already had a prioritization as well of what products and what departments would get staffed first. So it was a very dynamic first half hour to 45 minutes of making sure that we moved people and got them to the positions they were going to most be successful to produce those products that were most critical to that particular day based on shipping requirements, customer needs. So very dynamic time. And our entire factory was set up to be sequenced from a material perspective. And so we needed to get good really fast on how do we make these decisions and how can we push that information upstream so that we could reduce waste and variation and rework. So one of the first things we did was level-based operator certification. So we digitized our entire operator certification matrix. We knew the alumni list of every single operator in the factory, what jobs they've run, what departments they've been in, how long it'd been since they were last there. And we came up with predictive models where once we had all of our employees clock in at the beginning of the shift, algorithmically, we could predict the most optimal placement of employees for us to reach our production goals and minimize safety and quality. We also incorporated the employees' quality history because we have extensive process automation here called JDAT. It's really an MES tool that allowed us to track all the stations the employees in, every single step of work, and it was tied to their particular clock number, whether it was torques, serial number, any of those details we could get. And we built a predictive model so we could optimize the placement of our employees. We also built a heat map in the factory for those stations or those particular jobs that are most critical to quality, whether it had been a warranty claim somewhere in the past, or we knew from just a complexity of the process that an untrained operator should never be there. And if we did have an untrained operator, we had overrides that would have to, we basically had interlocks by station, by step, that we would have to have a manufacturing engineer, a quality engineer, or a supervisor would have to unlock that station before the employee could go to work or before that product could advance to the next station. So really put in some very tight process controls as well as predictive models to help employees get to where they were going to go, and then make sure that we were as equipped to be successful as possible when you've got 35 to 40% of your employees not show up for that shift. We also implemented real-time notification alerts for quality issues. So if what we would call a Q note inside of our MES system, if there was a detection in that a particular step didn't happen or a torque range wasn't met or a prox sensor didn't get engaged, it would be a real-time alert to the manufacturing engineer, the QE, and the module leader in that area, as well as to the operator in that zone, pop up a dialog box in the PC tied to their workstation so they would know that something is out of process control and to stop, hit their and-on light, and wait for help. And again, we really focused on quality first. Safety in that we could keep the factory open. We weren't going to put people in an upset condition where they were working out of ergonomic ranges, or that they were in a position where the lack of knowledge allowed them to be in an unsafe condition. And then we also really focused on quality. And we really doubled down on, if we're safe and we do it in a quality manner, we will be able to catch up. And at one point we ran about a week and a half behind schedule for our combine lines and almost 2 weeks behind schedule for some of our major front end equipment lines. And we were able to meet our obligation by going slow and then going fast later in the summer. Once we got through some stabilization, that we were able to hit all of our targets and make sure that we had product in the field ready to go so we could harvest and continue to provide the customers, the farmers, the ability to feed the world, feed the nation. And then when we talk about product quality, we started to get into some of these technological advances that we could really focus on maintaining product quality, but also around how can we increase span of control for our salary workforce. So really got into robotic process automation for some of those necessary non-value added tasks that were very repetitive, and spun up a bot that could help us in this manner. We really have kicked off something we call mission control, where we've set aside what had formerly been an office complex that had a myriad number of MEs and QEs sitting there, to where we've got essentially computers that are monitoring the MES system, monitoring torque, monitoring paint temperature, a variety of different conditions, and we're attempting to build predictive models to where we can push a notification to our MEs and QEs that tells them to go to this particular station because it's about to go out of process control. So really trying to leverage and get in front of this. We've got a long ways to go. We clearly want to embrace digitalization, and where possible, we're embracing automation, really with that goal from going from automation to autonomy, but very early in on this journey, particular to Harvester Works. And now transitioning to lessons learned. And again, I go back to my earlier comments. I wouldn't pretend to have solutions to all the problems, or even would not say that we were successful in every facet. It was very dynamic, and we learned along the way. But what I think really gained us some credibility with our workforce and with our customers, as well as any other key stakeholders, is we were transparent about the unknowns. When we think about, there was a lot of pressure to close the factory for 2 weeks in the month of April. But in speaking with the employees, it really was, that wasn't what was going to get us out of COVID-19. We were in for the long haul. And so we needed to be very transparent around, there's no easy button to hit here. We're going to have to work together to come up with ways that we can be safe at work, that we can continue to honor our commitments to our customers, and that we could keep the factory open and ensure that we delivered value to our shareholders as well as economic value to all of our employees, because continued employment was the key to getting paid. So really was just transparent about those unknowns, and really focused on how do we have a long view of what COVID-19 is going to do from a disruption standpoint within society, but also within John Deere. And then really used, I think it's the old analogy of don't let a good crisis go to waste, of embracing the technological disruption. It is, it's coming. And, really talking very specifically and very openly around, heretofore, a lot of the disruption had been a blue collar disruption. For example, when we brought in a new laser welded system, you might have 30 production employees before you started it, and that number could be 15 later as a result of the automation and all the efficiencies gained from going to robotics. And we've seen that inside the factory. But really being transparent around the technological disruption for the white collar workforce. And the best way to make sure you're relevant now and in the future, regardless of whether it's a COVID-19 disruption or whether it's technology that's coming into the factory that could be disruptive to the workforce, is get in front of it, learn now. And so we had extensive workshops, even in COVID, They could be virtual, or we socially distance, where we were trying to teach our employees about machine learning, where they could sign up for Coursera courses to learn Python and Jupyter, so that they could make sure that their skills were portable and relevant, and they could grow with the technology rather than just waiting to be disrupted. And we tried to educate them on jobs that were ripe for automation. We talked about those necessary non-value added tasks earlier. If you had a repetitive task that took you 4 to 5 hours a week, is there the potential to automate that either through RPA or other means, or are there ways to digitize that information so you can unlock insights to go faster? And so we saw a rapid adoption of the Power Suites app, Power BI, and really we saw initially it was a lot about dashboards, but then it became more about insights. And how could we make sure that we were faster to issue identification to problem resolution? And then really, certainly, again, so much more to learn, but be visible, be vulnerable. I spent a lot of time, so did my team, on the shop floor, wearing masks and just being available for employees to come talk. And I don't know how many different employees I talked to about their fears around a loved one or their children, or what do I do if the school's closed? And then they did. And really, John Deere just tried to take a longer view. We're 184 years young. We're going to get through COVID. This isn't the first major disruption Deere's been through. We've been through the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and through all that time, we honored our commitments to our customers and our employees. And so we just wanted to make sure that we were steadfast in that commitment, and that we were in this for the long haul, and that we're going to continue to be respectful, we're going to listen, and we're going to be available. And I think that really helped us to navigate the initial phases of COVID-19. And now clearly we're into year 2, and this year our business condition is like other manufacturers, we're seeing business come back and we're hiring. And so it's a great story for our new hire employees that, look, you're coming into a factory where we've got a track record of success of keeping reinfection rates almost at 0. We can honor our commitments to our customers, and that we are an employer of choice in this area. And so, no Pollyanna story. There were some dark days, and I wouldn't pretend that we had all the answers, but really that's the focus from a Harvester Works digitalization and COVID journey to get to this point. And again, I'm honored to be able to share just a little bit of what we went through, and I hope there was some value in this presentation for the folks that get to hear it. And with that, I look forward to the more engaging portion of the day, where we have an opportunity to do some question and answers. So with that, again, Jim Leach, Factory Manager, Harvester Works, very excited to be able to present a little bit about what we learned here, and wish all of you the very best of the rest of your day. So thank you very much.
Hey, thanks, Jim. If I could get you to turn on your camera, there's a few questions I think you'd be really well suited to answer here that have come across from the audience. The first one is really, so you looked at digital, the impact of digital in terms of COVID in the short term. What do you see as the long-term impact at the plant level of what will be not just temporary, but a permanent solution? And the one that's obvious to me that I think Billy mentioned, which is there's not really a need to get those subject matter experts traveling all over the world all the time anymore. What else can you talk to you about that?
Right. Yeah, I think from our senior leaders for Deere have told us to anticipate business travel is probably going to be 50% less than it was prior to the pandemic, and it would likely remain that way. Clearly, the adoption of the work from home technologies and video conferencing has happened. I think from it's caused us to, I think, speed up the embrace of Industry 4.0 that we talked a little bit about earlier, and really pushing into, I think Deere made the news recently, at least in the local area here in Iowa and Illinois, of purchasing 5G spectrum and really starting to move into 5G and unlock what having that type of capability. And really that's necessarily not to go after existing infrastructure. We're still going to need network drops and
Yeah.
switches and cabinets, but it's really to enable that more in that white or that greenfield space of how we're going to turn on additional insights. And as we add sensors and analytics and embedded intelligence and more equipment, we're going to get faster there. And then I think also the company just went through a reorganization as well to embrace smart industrial. And so that's really been kind of inculcated into our DNA is there's an expectation that we're going to innovate at every level of the organization. And I think that's going to be present regardless of when we get out of this situation with COVID-19.
Yeah. Oh, 5G is going to be its own wonderful journey on that one. I've been digging into that quite a bit myself. So there are a few things that I think I've expressed to you individually, but I want to do it here in front of the audience. The idea that you've made this about people and the idea that you use the word transparency, which I think is so critical to change. Can you talk about transparency when maybe the outcome isn't obvious to everybody, but you still have to be transparent? And then could you also add to that the importance of, you talk about portability of skills. If you're transparent that something's going to change in somebody's life, the best way to handle that in my situation from an industrial perspective is to understand what can this person do next that they don't have to do that they were doing. Can you talk about the transparency of that process and how you might have handled that?
Certainly. So, there were, as we went through our smart industrial transformation, there were functional areas that, especially at the corporate level, that ceased to exist. And there was massive disruption and turbulence, really within our salaried workforce. And it was needing to be approachable and admit that we didn't have the answers as we were going through the redesign, as well as just the impact of COVID-19. And really pointing to exactly to what you're referencing, that there is work that we're currently doing that we need to figure out how to deselect and get out of our work portfolio, because we needed to figure out ways to digitize that information and really embrace, the disruption that was coming as a result of digitalization. And then, as we look forward into the future and that portability of skills, what it took to be a traditional manufacturing engineer or a quality engineer, that the portfolio of skills, those knowledge, skills, and abilities was changing. And we had employees that were embracing how to write script and how to learn how to write code and really trying to get deeper into data and analytics so that we could unlock value inside of the factory. And so that's where it was. We kicked off what we called the Launch series, where we had a series of trainings that took them from just how to create a dashboard in Power BI all the way through, really rudimentary machine learning, and then really trying to paint the picture of what Industry 4.0 is going to look like and how we can try to get in front of that here so they can be future authors of the story rather than just waiting for the story to be written.
So just to build on that, and one last question here, I think, how do you make sure, you talked about going down on the floor and having discussions with people, but you're also talking a much larger transformation beyond just the impact of COVID. How do you make this a true trust-built two-way street, given that a lot of the people responsible for your value are the ones that will be impacted by that change? How do they get to feed that upstairs? Because I used to hear that last year was the biggest question. How do I convince leadership these things need to be done? Can you just opine on that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we're in the midst of it right now. We've had numerous pulse surveys with both the production and the administrative employees. And I think as a result of some of the changes, so some pieces of the transformation were very positive. We've gained some trust in our ability to communicate early and often and admit when we didn't have the answers, or if we needed to pivot from an initial direction on how we're going to solve a problem, admit that we were wrong, ask for some grace, and then move forward in a new direction. But I think that the relationship between the company and the employees, whether they be on the shop floor or in the office, needs to be continually tended. And I think this idea that employees are just going to continue to be a part of John Deere, for example, because of our rich history and what values we may have had in the past, we can't necessarily rely on that. We have to have a view towards the future have a compelling value statement on why we are an employer of choice, and then be honest when we've got gaps in how we're dealing with our employees, and really focus on that manager-employee relationship.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate your comments, and I do think it's commendable that, you know, a lot of companies give lip service to their employees and the value of their employees. You've actually demonstrated some very specific ways that you're you know, moving beyond lip service. And, you know, it's not always easy, but if you're transparent to what your objectives are, I think people at least understand where their footing is. So I commend you for that. So thanks for joining us. I really do appreciate that. And now I think we're going to turn toward the panel portion of our discussion. And I'm really excited to hear from this next group because it's an example of a word we hear all the time associated with digital transformation, which is the idea that ecosystems drive transformation, regardless of what the issue is. And we're going to talk about the particular issue of workforce concerns. So today we have three people, and if I could get you to turn your videos on and unmute yourself. The first is Liz Stuck, Head of Workforce Development at MXD, and Nilanjan Banerjee, Professor of Computer Science and Electrical Engineering, as well as Associate Professor of Cybersecurity and Manufacturing at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And finally, Sandra Parker, who works in Dow Operations ITOT Tech Center as the Global Improvement Director for Cybersecurity. So these three organizations have coordinated in creating, this is actually a second iteration that Liz will get into, but creating a lot of direction in the form of training and hiring guides, in this particular case for cybersecurity, knowledge, skills, abilities, and roles. So Liz, I would like to start with you. First of all, thanks for everybody. Sandra, if I could get you to kick on your, there we go, perfect. Liz, I want to start with you. If you could just outline the initiative and give us some background, and then Nilanjan, Sandra, if you could also then add to that in terms of why your company joined this or organization, in Nilanjan's instance, why you joined into this effort, and really what your individual role was within it.
Great, thank you, Mike. And thanks for the opportunity to talk about this program today. We're pretty excited over at MXD about this. We think that it's exactly the kind of collaboration and training that we are hearing is necessary from our partners. So excited to get to talk about it today and share some perspectives. You heard Chandra at the beginning of this talk about the need. There's a significant need to think about what does the future of work look like when it comes to cybersecurity, cybersecurity and the unique needs for manufacturers. So we did do a hiring guide that we released at the end of last year that identified 247 roles that we believe are the future of work in cybersecurity for manufacturing. These are the kinds of things that we identify: specific roles, the career pathways, the skills needed, the training required, what kind of individuals are uniquely suited for these roles. And it really gets to the point that Billy made at the beginning, which is what roles should industry be considering in the new economy, and how can industry, academia, and organizations like MXD work together to bring that training online. So with the number Chandra cited, that 2.4 million manufacturing job openings by 2029, and I saw a question about this. That is a U.S. number. That's just U.S. workers, as well as a significant gap in cybersecurity specialists, 500,000 in the U.S. We know that this is an area ripe for opportunity. It's also an area where we should be thinking about how are we helping those who have been displaced from the workforce get training and get into some of these roles. So that is what was driving the development of this project, which we call CyMOT, which is Cybersecurity for Manufacturing Operational Technology. And this program is for adult learners, and it's customized to sort of a wide range of needs that we're seeing in this sort of fast-paced cybersecurity manufacturing industry. We can talk a little bit more about some of the specifics of the program as we go through, but I think this is the kind of thing where we are running a pilot that is built off of the hiring guide. So we have looked at the roles in the hiring guide, those deemed most critical by partners, and looking at how do we develop the training for those. And so It's with the partnership of Nalanjan and the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, that we have been able to develop this. And it's with the partnership of industry partners like Sandra and Dow that we are able to kind of take this out and run these pilots and see where are we delivering value and how are we going to get individuals the skills they need so that they can step into these roles.
So, Nalanjan, can you weigh in as to how UMBC got involved in this specifically and what your role is in the initiative?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. So as Elizabeth pointed out, SciMot is essentially a platform that provides personalized training to practitioners in industry for certain roles which relate to cybersecurity and manufacturing. So what UMBC and UMBC training centers are doing is actually providing the curriculum around development of this platform. So it's a web-based platform which provides both synchronous and asynchronous mediums of curriculum delivery. So personally, what I am doing is not only developing the curriculum, but also the platform that would be used to provide that curriculum. So one of the big things about this is, as you all know, cybersecurity is one area where the need for upskilling is now. And at the same time, cybersecurity is also evolving over time. And what universities like UMBC and entities like UMBC training centers can provide is curriculum that already exists for that upskilling. So it's really rapid prototyping of the curriculum. So we have developed a gamut of curriculum around cybersecurity for cyber physical systems and manufacturing in the past. What we can do is we can pick and choose from what we have already developed and make it fine-tuned towards the need that industry has. So that's exactly what we are doing with this specific platform is in SciMot, given that we want to upskill an individual to a specific role, we provide a very personalized learning plan based on short courses and short modules that would upskill an individual towards that role.
And Sandra, you're muted at the moment, but if you could weigh in, my experience with Dow has been when they identify a need, they're very aggressive in going and figuring out how to solve that. Could you discuss really how Dow came to this and what your role has been in it?
Absolutely. And just first, let me thank the ARC Advisory Committee.
Absolutely.
MXD for the opportunity to be on this panel this afternoon. But listen, I think our previous presenters said it well. There is a need for us to be adaptable and flexible, especially as we move forward in these environments. And at Dow, we're always looking at where we can pick up new tools, strategies, and information. And we believe that being a part of this specific pilot training program falls in line with where we are heading and where we see the next generation of employees. So partnering with organizations like MXD and the University of Maryland, both known to be experts in the field of cybersecurity, whether it is with assessments and training, this really allows us to evaluate training firsthand, working with this pilot, but most importantly, really having a front row seat to absorb as much as we can and to understand what we should be doing to integrate this data and detail back into Dow. This also provides a platform for those amongst our team members that will actually be participating to network with other similar industries and to share experiences. We'll have a very diverse group that will participate in the pilot, from new hires to experienced hires. So we're believing that this experience in the pilot will certainly help us progress the work that we're trying to do within cybersecurity.
So I'm going to throw this next question out here to any and all of you. And Nalanjan, you touched on it, which I think was maybe with your approach, it was more of a knowledge object approach to curriculum development, really kind of like I mean, if you want to talk, it was almost like an agile approach to education. How do you keep up? I mean, the stuff I can't keep up, and it's my job to monitor this stuff 24/7. How do you keep up with how fast it changes and the impact of that on humans? Anyone can answer that one because it's a tough one.
So I can take a first stab at it. So I think the collaborations here is kind of key to essentially keeping up with what is changing. If, say, academia worked alone in a silo, then potentially what they would be developing in terms of, say, curriculum would be totally out of date. And this sort of a collaboration where you have a digital manufacturing institute like MXD and industrial partners like Dow, there is an inflow of information that goes through the group like on a daily basis, basically. And so the curriculum is not being developed out of vacuum. So basically, this has been developed for specific roles where the roles have been developed over a long period of time through conversations with industry partners. So I want to emphasize that this sort of industry, academia, manufacturing institute collaboration is really key to make sure that we are up and running on the most latest and greatest in terms of curriculum development for cybersecurity.
Liz, Sandra, do you have opinions on that point? Don't have to, just want to make sure that.
I was going to just say from a Dow perspective, I mean, having training specifically in cyber is so critical, especially with the dynamics that's happening in industry today. I mean, Dow, just like many other companies, we've been on this whole journey of convergent IT and OT, and we've heard several presenters in this forum talk about that, but we're continuing to evaluate, what does it take in order for us to be in a position to better protect the environments that we've been asked to do. So as Billy talked about in his presentation, we do have an on-the-ground resource group called the Cyber Delivery Specialists, and really their charge is ensuring that they are armed with all of the necessary training that was and continues to be critical. So, they're essentially our front line for that. So even in that position that they're in, we know that cybersecurity, the landscape is continuing to evolve. So we have to be ready to evolve as well. And so I think even recently on yesterday, we're seeing even more things in the news regarding sophisticated attacks and hacking. And so our team members really have to have the right tools. And most of all, they must be knowledgeable about what's going on. So programs like this really help us tune the knowledge and the skills necessary for us to keep up with what's going on in industry. It's just continuing to evolve so rapidly that it really forces us to look at, what is the right skill set needed on a frequent basis for them to be effective in their roles.
If I could, I would just add, I would echo some of what Nilanjan said, which is that collaboration that comes from bringing subject matter experts together from a number of different organizations. So when we look at the pilot that will launch this month, there are about 20 seats on the pilot. There'll be about 11 different organizations represented. And so you're bringing together, as Sandra said, some people who have a fair amount of experience, some who are newer, but all sort of bringing this expertise and these perspectives. And I think that is really critical as we try to stay on top of, in this case, cybersecurity for manufacturing. How do we know what the latest threat is, the latest gap that can open us up to insecurities and challenges? And I think the Institute, MXD, leans heavily on our partners, of which there are about 300 different organizations, to help us keep our finger on the pulse of what is happening nationally, to make sure that as we are developing programs with partners, we are making sure they are meeting the at least the current need, and hopefully with an eye towards what are the future needs that we need to anticipate.
So, so let's build on that a little bit, because I think you make an interesting point. So, how do you all three of you have organizations that have some commonality or overlap in objectives, but all three of you, by the nature of your organizations, have fundamentally different business objectives. How do you, when you're thinking about what to do as an initiative, and I think this applies not just specifically to workforce issues, but just digital issues overall, how do you determine a common set of objectives that give you your anchor point for moving forward?
Well, within Dow, we had the opportunity to collaborate with some critical stakeholders. We have very close relationships with our process automation group, with our corporate IT security team. But most importantly, we also have an opportunity on a routine basis to have conversations with some of our business and manufacturing leaders. So together, we're collaborating to understand the most critical areas that need to be addressed. And we've also had the opportunity to do some assessments to understand, where exactly do we have strengths, or in fact, where we may have gap areas that would lend itself to help us understand better where we need that additional training to support overall business objectives.
Yeah, for MXD's workforce program, there are sort of three key components we look at when we're evaluating programs to make sure that they're all part of a project. And the first is that it has to be industry led. So we have to know that industry thinks this is a valuable endeavor, that they feel that this is addressing a challenge or a pain point, and that they are invested in the development of the program and the outcomes. We want to make sure that anything we're doing results in individuals getting into the workforce or getting into new roles within the workforce. So that is a key part of what we're doing. The second piece is that there's a community driving the effort. So how are we making sure, and Chandra touched on this, how are we making sure that not just industry is involved, but academia, regional partners, economic development groups, how are we bringing that whole community together so that we don't create these siloed solutions that just work for one organization or one academic institution. And then the third piece that we focus on is, are we engaging populations that are otherwise unengaged? So when we're talking about such a massive skills gap and this 2.4 million jobs, it's not going to work to just train those who are already in the workforce. We've got to find people who are not in this workspace already, who have never considered these kinds of careers, and provide them with the opportunities to learn and to gain these skills and bring them in, because the only way we're going to address this and fill this gap is by bringing in a new set of individuals. And the only way we're going to find them is to engage those who previously haven't had the opportunity.
So, Liz, I'm going to stick with you for just a second on those 3 points. I assume that the answer might be yes, but just want to see if there's any sort of difference. I'm familiar with your process of how you reach out to the industry to get input and prioritization on what's important for you. Do you see that if you hold those 3 principles, that it holds true for not just large manufacturers, but small, small and medium size, or do you have to tweak things naturally for their particular needs of the small and medium-sized manufacturers?
Sometimes we find it even easier to do that with the small and medium manufacturers. Not always, but we have some great examples of small and mid-sized manufacturers who are very engaged in their community, whether it's at the middle or high school level, community college level, who are already trying to figure out how to collaborate as a whole community. Including bringing in other industry partners within that community, maybe even competitors in some cases we've seen, but certainly other industry partners, with this idea that sort of rising tides lift all ships, right? How do we create training programs within a community that open individuals and future workers up to a whole host of career opportunities, which in turn drives economic development opportunity for that community. So, so there are some occasions where we actually find it's an even easier process because those small and mid-sized manufacturers are sometimes more engaged with the community already. But generally, the process works for both.
So, Nolan and John, I want put this question, start with you. How are you working through this? You touched a little bit on it, but how are you working through this thing that is so specific from situations, business situations where industries move from effectively analog to digital? Because it's happened before, it's happening again. I think much more broadly and deeply than it has ever before. How do you manage the idea that really fundamentally changes what you need to be educated on and what you need to be trained on or have a specific skill in? How do you handle that from a knowledge management and education standpoint?
Right. So yeah, in that perspective, I think the roles that are defined by MXD's hiring guide really helps us. So the roles are extremely detailed in what essentially the end goal is. So both in terms of competencies as well as skill sets. And that really narrows down for us and increases the specificity of essentially what the curriculum should be training towards. So once you have that at the back of your mind, then what you need to really do is the curriculum that you already have, you need to adapt to those specific competencies and skill sets. And the next thing that you essentially add to the mix is hands-on experience with respect to practical examples of what cybersecurity threats could lead to and what real defenses would look like. So we start with those roles, which is a great starting point because you already have the specificity that you need in terms of skill sets and competencies, which is in systems engineering or computer science or other areas. And then you work backwards. And then potentially the curriculum that you already have, you adapt to it, to these roles to meet the goals that you're looking for. So what I would say that is these roles really make our life easier rather than starting in vacuum. Yeah.
So I want to take a slightly left turn here. Again, I think this whole discussion has implications beyond just cybersecurity, but we can see if we can pull this down to the cybersecurity level. I'm interested in terms of what you think, Sandra in particular, and Liz as well. What's the role of the vendor in this development of knowledge and the development of education for specific roles? And I want to put a caveat on that. Vendors have the capacity with user experience to fundamentally change how people interact with things, with data, and even cybersecurity, where you have, physical devices now are distributed and have to have built-in security to support cybersecurity initiatives. What do you think the role is for vendors, and really how do you see just user experience in terms of all the people that are integrated into a cybersecurity decision or potentially risk point? And maybe Sandra, probably in fairness, start with you on that one, if you can.
Sure. Certainly our vendors do play a critical role because we're looking towards them for solutions that can be brought into our environments. And we're also not looking for that quick fix, but we're looking for how do we maintain these types of systems or solutions or programs for the long term. How do we sustain those things in our environment? How do they mesh with our existing platforms? So we certainly want to be able to partner with our vendors to understand how do we mesh all of those things into our existing environments. But we certainly also want to ensure that our vendors understand exactly what the needs of our environments are as well. But it's a partnership. It's an ongoing partnership that we see that needs to happen.
Liz, how do you integrate them into the process in terms of helping you define what the need is?
Well, specifically on the cybersecurity space, a lot of that work is done through the cybersecurity team at MXD. So one of the titles that MXD holds is the National Center for Cybersecurity and Manufacturing, a designation we received through the Department of Defense. And our cybersecurity team does a lot of work with vendors to understand what's out there, who's in this space, who is, what are they offering. We look at this as we think about collaboration on our 25,000 square foot factory floor. As a nonprofit, we are not producing anything. We use that as a test bed, as a test bed with a whole bunch of different skids and tables and pilots, and we're using it to try different things out. We collaborate with a lot of vendors there, and so they are a part of everything from sort of the work on our factory floor to the work that our cybersecurity team is doing, and to a certain extent, certainly in our workforce programs too, understanding what programs are out there that are working, that where we can be helpful in supporting rather than creating something that might be duplicative with what's already in existence.
So I'm going to give each of you a shot to weigh in here. And Liz, I definitely want to make sure that I allow you a shameless plug in terms of if people want to get these hiring guides. I have read them. I find them fascinating. So as part of your answer, if you could let people know, that'd be great. In terms of this ecosystem, what is the one thing that you recommend to a company similar to Dow, just an end user, a manufacturer, in terms of them wanting to build an effective ecosystem, whether it's around cybersecurity or any other digital approach? If each of you could just weigh in on that from your perspectives.
Yeah, honestly, it would be our jobs taxonomies. We have two. One is focused on digital, one is focused on cyber for manufacturing. Together, they identify over 400 different roles that are what we believe is the future of work. And I think that's the important point to emphasize. This is not focused on the workforce needs today, and there's certainly a need for those, and there are certainly great organizations out there doing that work. We are looking at what do manufacturers need down the line to make sure that they can be successful, and how should they be thinking about that now. So I would say those two resources, both of which are on our website at mxdusa.org and both free to download, are a really great place to start. And it's not just the roles, it's the skills required, it's the career pathways into those roles and from those roles into other roles. And we know that our industry partners are using them to help develop position descriptions. As they're looking for candidates for new jobs, they're leveraging these tools to develop their position descriptions. And we're certainly using them for the development of training programs like SIMOT. And so I think that is a great place to start if you're a manufacturer looking for some resources. And then I would say the next piece is our virtual workshops, where we are bringing all of these partners together to talk about some of these challenges. It's a great place to kind of hear the state of the state and understand what manufacturers are doing, whether it's workforce, cyber, or digital.
Great. Noah and John?
So one of the key attributes of this is personalization. So an individual comes into a program like this and has a specific set of skill sets to begin with, a specific background. Key to the success of a platform like this is making sure that the learning plans are personalized to that individual. So SIMOT is one example where we take in individuals from various backgrounds related to cybersecurity and manufacturing, but at different levels. But we are hoping to provide personalized learning plans to each individual based on what their background is. So personalization is key to the success of a platform like this, in my opinion.
Makes sense. And Sandra?
I just ditto what Liz John said. You know, it's really building that skill set, a transferable skill that we can continue to build on, and certainly looking at opportunities for us to build the pipeline, especially with cybersecurity, since that's such a critical area that we've got our attention focused on at the moment.
Well, I really appreciate the great conversation. As always, thank you so much to everybody. Also want to thank Jim and Billy and Chandra. Tomorrow I will be returning again with Wednesday morning's keynote at 10 a.m. Eastern time. So until then, everybody enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks to everybody, by the panelists and presenters here. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.